Have you ever had a case where the child clearly suffered HIE during birth, but the records don't match what the parents are saying, and the records indicate the team did everything right, so the family is left without justice? I'm going to pause it. You can pause the video and read the rest of it, the rest of that comment. This is actually something that comes up a lot more, I think, than people really realize, especially when we're talking about an HIE brain injury and these types of investigations. And as a birth injury lawyer, I talk with families all over the country about these types of issues. And there are situations where families will report to me that they clearly remember things happening during labor, but when we get the medical records, those events are either not documented, or they are documented differently, or they are contradicted by the chart itself. And I'm actually working on a case right now for a family where the family is reporting that one of the nurses was actually asleep while at the nurse's station and the fetal monitor was going. And the family is adamant about that, about what they saw. And of course, there's nothing in the medical records that says this, that the nurse was asleep. And of course, the nurse is strongly denying that this happened. And all of these types of things can create difficult situations, because in these types of cases, the records matter tremendously. The experts who will review these cases are relying on the labor records. They're looking at the nursing notes. They're looking at the physician documentation, the fetal monitoring strips, the medication records, the operative reports, if they're there, cord gases, neonatal records, to determine whether there was a deviation from the standard of care, which is what has caused this baby's HIE brain injury. And sometimes this becomes one of the hardest parts of my job. And that's because there are situations where I may believe what the family is telling me, but my belief or these beliefs alone is not going to be enough to prove negligence in court. And if the records strongly support that the doctors and the nurses, that they acted appropriately, and there is no objective counter to those records, then that can be times where I simply just cannot move forward with the case. Now, with that said, sometimes the records themselves can still help uncover what was actually happening. And one of the biggest examples of this is going to be with the fetal heart monitoring strips, because the tracing is the tracing. It just records what is there. And sometimes the strip itself can contradict what the providers later try to say in their notes. And a good example of that can happen in uterine rupture cases. There can be situations where the written notes, they may downplay that there was even any concerns, but the fetal heart tracing, it may show that there were warning signs building up way before that catastrophic event actually occurred. And this can sometimes directly contradict the doctors and the nursing notes where they're trying to downplay concerns. And I'm currently involved in a uterine rupture case right now where approximately around about 10 minutes before the rupture became obvious, mom was complaining of abdominal pain. Now, the records, they do reflect that complaint by mom, but even if they didn't reflect that complaint, the strips themselves were already showing that there were concerning findings that were building up hours earlier. There were repetitive late decelerations. There were prolonged periods of minimal variability. And eventually there was bradycardia along with other types of concerning signs. And all of this matters because there are some studies that discuss these types of exact warning signs before a rupture. And with one study, it specifically said that the most common fetal heart rate abnormalities that occurred prior to uterine rupture were recurrent late decelerations and bradycardia. The appearance of recurrent late decelerations may be an early sign of an impending uterine rupture. And now, also, you can also find clues with this in the head imaging. Is there a mixed pattern? That would mean that there is a partial, prolonged, and acute injury. And if there's evidence of a partial, prolonged injury, then that could mean that the problem may have been building up over time. Now, I want to make sure I'm clear with this. Every uterine rupture is not going to be predictable or preventable. And that distinction is extremely important. We have to keep that in mind. There are absolutely going to be situations where that rupture is going to happen suddenly without any type of meaningful warning to the medical professionals and without enough time to prevent that injury, even when doctors and nurses are acting within the standard of care. There are going to be cases where the hemorrhaging is just so severe and it develops so quickly that despite appropriate care and intervention, the mom and baby will still, it's going to be difficult to prevent an injury to them. And I think it's also important to say that just because, I never want families to think that every bad outcome automatically is going to mean medical malpractice. It doesn't mean that. But going back to that original question, there are going to be simply times where I just cannot prove, I can't prove what the family believes happened. And these are extremely difficult situations when that happened. Difficult for me, but especially difficult for the family because they're dealing with it. Because believing something happened and being able to prove it are not always going to be the same thing. And that is why in these HIE investigations, obtaining and carefully reviewing the fetal heart strips, looking at the labor records, looking at the cord gases, looking at the placental pathology if that was there, and looking at the overall timeline. That's why all of that is important, because sometimes the records will support negligence, but sometimes they're gonna support that appropriate care was given, and sometimes the truth is going to sit in a very uncomfortable place where there are suspicions, where there are concerns, unanswered questions, but there's just not enough objective evidence to prove exactly what happened. Again, I'm Marcus Boston. If you have any other questions about your baby's HIE brain injury at birth or its subsequent CP or cerebral palsy diagnosis from a medical legal standpoint, don't hesitate to reach out and contact me. You can find out more information about me and my profile. My information is there. If you're watching this video on certain apps, you can send me a DM and we could chat a little bit about your baby story, or you can just wait and watch the picture that follows the end of this video. All right, that's going to be it for this morning's quick educational video. Have a great day, everybody.